Welcome to Authentically Woman, a sanctuary dedicated to empowering women. We are a faith-based healing circle focused on changing perspectives and inspiring healing through authenticity and vulnerability. Join us in this journey of empowerment and healing. Faith has been my anchor, and in the darkest moments, I realized how much God's love could heal the brokenness. It was through faith that I found my strength. When you surrender to God's plan, that's when you truly start to live. Faith isn't just about believing, it's about acting on what you believe. I am Tinashe Mujera, a transformational leadership coach, an author and marketplace professional using faith as my anchor. Join us on the Faith in Action podcast, where each week we journey together through resilience, hope, and transformation. Tune in and let our guests help guide you toward your next steps in healing and growth. Hello, everybody. Good day, good morning, good evening, depending on which part of the world you are joining us from. Welcome to the Faith in Action podcast with me, your host, Tinashe Mujera. Again, another super exciting episode that we have in store for you. But before I get into that, I just want to invite any woman out there who is looking for a healing circle, who is looking for a place where they can be vulnerable and authentic, where they can heal with other women. Please do join Authentically Woman. We are on Facebook as a group. We are also on Instagram as authentically_woman, woman with an A. If you are out there and you are seeking that place, do join us and follow us for more exciting events and opportunities coming through. Now, today I am joined by a phenomenal guest who I am going to be introducing just now. But before I go into that, I just want to introduce the title of the podcast today. It's very interesting. We are going to be leaning into what we call positive masculinity. We are joined by a special guest under the topic, redefining strength and building a nation of balanced and compassionate leaders. Beyond the tough exterior and a new look at masculinity with a very, very important guest, Sydney Madibo. Now, I'm going to read his bio before I welcome him to the Faith in Action podcast. He is the founder of Institute of Leadership Excellence. Sydney Madibo is a renowned and accomplished professional public speaker, an entrepreneur, a project manager and facilitator, as well as a qualified educator with a bachelor's education degree from the Northwest University. He founded and directs the Sydney Madibo Institute of Leadership Excellence, as I've said, a private company based in Johannesburg, South Africa. He heads facilitation for Johannesburg-based NPO that is named Father a Nation. He also conducts financial literacy education programs for media company called Grounded Media. Sydney is an enthusiastic orator who uses his teaching abilities, leadership background, and love for people in the community to drive much-needed dialogue and discourse of topical issues affecting society. Notably, Sydney is the recipient of the 2018 Gauteng Premier Youth Excellence Award. He was a mentor on the SABC One show Future Leaders and won popular debate show One Day Leader on SABC One. He's a regular feature on television and radio platforms and is certainly a force to be reckoned with. Now, given that beautiful and amazing bio, how privileged are we to be hosting Sydney Madibo, on the Faith in Action podcast, where we will be breaking down topical issues that affect society, particularly deep diving into what we call positive masculinity. I'm super excited. And if you are all watching or listening, please help me to welcome Sydney Madibo to the Faith in Action podcast from Sydney. Welcome to Faith in Action.
Hi, Tina. Thanks for having me. Hello to your viewers, listeners, followers, everyone. Just thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Amazing. We are really honored to be having and hosting you on the Faith in Action podcast. We don't take your time for granted. Thank you for honoring the invite and coming through to share your journey and your wisdom and the work that you do. That is really, really amazing and significant and has really been transforming lives in communities. Much needed work that is really significant for this day and time in the season, if I can say it that way, particularly for men. So yeah, if you can introduce yourself, Sydney, maybe just greet the listeners, introduce yourself and tell me something that I did not mention on your bio about yourself.
I think you've mentioned quite a mouthful. I'm Sydney Madibo, born and bred in the Vaal Triangle. I was raised in, it's not such a small town anymore, but a lot of people think of it as a small town called Vanderbiltpark. It makes up one of the three towns that make up the Vaal Triangle. The other one is Vereniging, and the other ones, there's a constant debate whether it's Heidelberg or Sasolburg. But whichever one people choose, one of those towns, they make up the Vaal Triangle. I am the sixth child of seven, raised by parents. Both of them were educators. And I qualified as an educator myself. And I'm a regular guy that just tries to do as much as I can before the bell stops ringing, or until the bell rings. I just want to be able to make a significant amount of impact in my personal life and the lives of the people around me, and maybe also in the communities and the societies that I find myself working in. So some people say that I'm an activist, others say I'm a leader, others say I'm a facilitator. But I just think of myself as just a normal human being who does what any normal human being should be doing.
Take it all, Sydney. Take it all. All those titles are befitting for the work that you do, really. No, amazing, amazing. So can you say that seeing your parents coming home from work after teaching a class or educating students is what led you to also pursue education as a career, or maybe to study being an educator?
When I completed my grade 12, I actually, in my very first year of varsity, because I was so involved during my schooling years in debating and public speaking, in my very first year, I was actually studying towards a law degree. So I enrolled for a Bachelor of Arts in Law. I was majoring in politics. And I think it was expected because of the extramural activities I was involved in during my high schooling years and my primary schooling years. But I don't know, as what would have it, as sometimes being young and naive to just how easy it is to slip up an opportunity. In my very first year, I flunked a number of modules, right? So I failed like a lot of subjects, which was a bit strange because all throughout my primary schooling and my high schooling, I wasn't the smartest kid in the class, but I was, always dedicated to my schoolwork. But varsity comes with it the freedoms that you don't experience while you're still in school. And so I flunked those modules. And then I remember the time I had a conversation. I can't recall if I was having it with my mother or with my father, but I thought to myself, you know what? I've flunked this opportunity. I don't have student aid. I don't have any form of funding. And I was really met with the with a dilemma of possibly having to sit out a year because we had all of these outstanding fees that were piled up, and yeah, it just seemed like a very dull, very dark place. But when I was actually applying to study at the university that I studied at, even law itself was not my first choice. My first choice was actually psychology, right? My first choice was psychology, and I think I missed it by like a point. My second option was law, and I think I enrolled towards a law degree because it was expected that because you were so involved in debating and public speaking, you're going to fall into this line. But I actually, in the following year, I was lucky enough to get a student loan, a study loan. And with that study loan, I was then able to study towards a bachelor's in education. It too took me a bit of time to complete because I've never really been the type of person that is able to focus on one thing. So while I was studying towards my bachelor's in education, I was involved in the SRC. I was in student politics. I was part of this club on campus and that club on campus, and those television programs that you mentioned that I have in the bio. Something that I do not mention is that almost all of those things were happening while I was studying.
Wow.
Because I've always been the type of person that asks themselves, what lies beyond the fence, right? What lies beyond the qualification, and what lies beyond the title of being an educator or a lawyer or a psychologist? What more is there that an individual can do apart from what they are already doing? And sometimes even in my own family, I've been rebuked and reprimanded that I bite off more than I can chew. But the thrill of being able, as a person, you have this innate voice that tells you that you are capable. And my honest belief is sometimes if we do not listen to that innate voice that roots for us and that chants us into action, that tells us that you can do it and that you have what it takes, then we go through the rest of our lives wondering, what if I had studied and done all of those things, right? What if I had done more with my skills, my talents, and the opportunities that were presented to me? When I switched from studying law into education, in my head, I just thought to myself that, okay, I'm going to study this degree, 4 years in and out, get a job, teach, maybe become a principal, subject advisor, whatever. But during that process, that constant question that, oh, what if I tried this out? Oh, what if I tried that out? And my line of work today, every single thing that I do ties into not only what I did study, but it also ties into the experience that I got involving myself in leadership, the experience that I got working in radio at some point on campus. It ties into the experience that I got going into television, so many things. All of these things, some way or the other, they managed to, to form they came from just being chaos to forming a straight line in a merger where all of them just somehow complement one another.
Beautiful, beautiful. A true testament of all things work together. So now you talk about before the bell rings, I want to get as much as I can get done before the bell rings. And I think that really resonates to an extent with the work that we do here, but also my firm belief, which is dying empty. What does that look like for you? What does it mean? Why that? What was the light bulb moment, or what was the moment where you realized that, you know what, I need to get the job done before the bell rings?
Funny enough, when I was in high school, I was involved in debating and public speaking, and I always used to go to these tournaments. And then one day, a teacher of mine, my maths teacher, I was attending school at a school in Sebokeng called Tutotiro. I must have been doing maybe my grade 10 or my grade 11. And my maths teacher, Mr. Machiche, he came to me with a book written by Dr. Miles Monroe, the late Dr. Miles Monroe. And, it's, I think the title of the book, if I remember, this is many, many, many years ago, right? But the title of the book, if I remember correctly, it said something like Discovering Your Potential or something like that. And inside of the book, Miles Monroe just kept emphasizing continuously how a lot of people live empty lives. Not, and I'm not quoting the book verbatim, but just paraphrasing, he was referring to how graves are just full of potential that the world will never know about. And he then presents a question in this book that what if you tapped into your own potential? What if you tapped into the many abilities that are vested inside of you? And I think at that time, because at that time, participating in extramural activities was, it was something that you do not to fixate yourself on the schoolwork that you have to do, right? But you don't think of those extramurals as something that could potentially create a livelihood or a life for you once you're older. Right. But, just reading that book and getting to the point where I was now in my first year, failing the life out of these law modules and really taking a moment back and introspecting and realizing that, I can point a finger at so many things that are happening, so many complaints that I can have about my surroundings, about my life and what is going right, what is going wrong. I can point the finger, but at the end of the day, I'm holding my academic transcript and I'm the one who has failed. I had the opportunity in every single module, in every single subject that I was studying to really make the most of it, pass it, and, apart from making everyone else proud, making myself proud. And I think just being able to constantly remember that little lesson that I got from Dr. Miles Monroe at that point when I had failed dismally, knowing very well that I have what it takes to pass, to achieve, and, to become something or someone great. The light bulb moment came at a moment of failure and not when I was reading the book. The book came as a response to the failure that, you've read this amazing book. It told you that such things happen. And now it's time to pick yourself up and really put it into action. So yeah, apart from that, another light bulb moment was a movie, but this movie that Morgan Freeman is in, and I think it's Scarlett Johansson, called Lucy. And in this movie, they're talking about how the human brain only uses up until I think just 1 or 2% of its overall capacity, and that we have actually 94, 5, 6, 7, 8% of vested potential inside of us that we're not even aware of. And I remember they asked a question that what if you were just to tap into an extra percentage of your overall cerebral capacity? It might not happen in my lifetime or in this lifetime, but it answers the question around doing a million things before the bell rings. Because what if in those million things, something will happen? Some form of innovation, invention, creation, whatever.
Yeah.
I really think that the light bulb moment for me came during a moment of failure, and I had to make sense of the failure and really ask myself that, how do I move forward from it and not wallow and sit in pity.
Amazing. Thank you, Sydney, for taking us through that amazing insights. It came at a moment of failure, not necessarily in your moments of winning. And I think it's important to all those that are watching, that are listening, that it's important to always realize that in your moments of failure, there's always lessons to be learned. And perhaps that is where you need to be to get to the next stage and to understand and realize that there's actually more in you. Or maybe a redirection, maybe an answer to something that you've always been looking to a question you've always been looking for an answer for. Now, as a preacher's kid and growing up, we always talk about the PKs and and being naughty. How is that for you? And how has that shaped and helped you with the work that you are currently doing now?
No, I actually am not a preacher's kid. I actually come from a very polarized household. I come from a household where my mother is an avid believer. growing up, our family church, we go to church on Saturday. Sabbath is on Saturday, and if there's like a ceremony, something that is being celebrated, we're there until, the common slogan that we use is, we are there until Amen. And Amen is when everything is done and church is out. And you will know in traditionally old, predominantly Black South African churches, that can mean anything from Sunday evening to Monday morning. And, so by polarized, I think we come from a blend of two different worlds, where on one end, everything is fixed and placed on the basis of faith and belief. And on my dad's side, it was a bit more open-mindedness in inverted commas, rationalizing scientific thought, and a bit less faith. And I think that coming from that world of difference, as an individual and as a person growing up, you sort of need to ask yourself the question that, well, what works, right? What, genuinely speaking, if I look at the world, if I look at life, if I look at not only my family, but other families in surrounding areas and surrounding communities, what has always worked? And honestly speaking, what has always worked are people generally who dedicate their lives to service, and people who dedicate their lives to doing more for other people than they do for themselves. And even if you go through just scripture, that is exactly how Jesus Christ lived his life, right? Being of service, giving more than he takes, and always advising to, I was listening to something yesterday, that be kind to a stranger, open up the house to someone that you don't know, share your itsy bitsy piece of food, share it with someone who might potentially need it more than you do. And growing up in our household, that was very typical. We'd have men just walking past who are working in other people's gardens, who are not being fed in those gardens, and they would just randomly come to our house and ask for this and ask for that. And just being able to see my parents be open up their home, not only to our family members, but also to complete strangers who had the potential to harm us, to do whatever to us, but just having that mustard seed faith that nothing is going to happen, and this person could. I remember growing up, my mother would always say, when we asked that, why are you giving this man food, whereas you don't know him? And she'd always just jokingly say that one day it could be God, or it could be Jesus just walking in the yard, and you might not even be aware. And translating that into my line of work, most of the people that I meet at the conferences I speak at the schools that I train at the companies that I do work at, are people that I'll probably never ever see again in my life. But just the knowledge that I could have impacted that person's life positively, and because of that positive impact, they're going to impact someone else's life positively. It's something that you have to teach yourself as an individual, that you might not get a reward for doing something good, but doing something good makes it much easier for you as a person to sleep at night, as opposed to trampling on people and destroying them and destroying their belief systems and just completely tarnishing them. So coming from that whole polarization, there was always a midpoint, and that midpoint has always been the belief that if you do good for other people, then some of the other good will definitely translate back into your life.
That's right. Yeah. Interesting. Thank you for sharing that as well. I think it just speaks to the, to karma. What goes around comes around, really. And I guess it also then ties into the work of service and communities that you do. I guess it was then nurtured from there. It started there, where, people would just come into your home and ask for this and that, and you were there to serve. As you have said, our life is a life of service. Now let's get into the meaty stuff, Sydney. We want to hear all about the work that you do. The people are itching to hear about the work that you do, the lessons that you have to share, and the wisdom, and particularly redefining this issue of positive masculinity that we want to talk about. Positive masculinity. What is positive masculinity? What drove you to starting an NPO called Father a Nation, and why the name Father a Nation? Why the name Father a Nation, and why positive masculinity?
So funny enough, a couple of years ago, while I was still studying, because of all of this hype around this guy called Sydney who's on television and he's doing this and doing that and doing that, a very good, I would say, mentor. He's much older for me to call him a friend. But this gentleman, an affluent entrepreneur from the Val, Mr. Tammy Manzi, introduced me to the founder of Father Nation, Craig Wilkinson. And, you know, I remember meeting them, and Craig said to me that he's got this idea or this vision of redefining masculinity. And how he wants to redefine masculinity is by teaching men that if you can heal men, then you can heal society. And I think just from that tagline, I was already sold, because I have a relatively small stature. I'm not like a big buff. You know, I'm not the kind of guy that you meet at the gym with the six pack. That's definitely not me. And I think oftentimes, whenever we think of masculinity, we want to attach things to men that define their manhood. We want to attach their bank balance to define their manhood. We want to attach the size of their triceps and their biceps to define their manhood. You know, there always has to be something that is tangible, that describes or defines what makes a man.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I thought to myself at that time when they gave me this opportunity that not only do we have an opportunity to do important work, teaching and redefining masculinity, but we would also be an opportunity to break down incredible stereotypes that have led to so much chaos around the world, right?
Yeah.
So much chaos. The mere fact that we as men in a lot of our cultures, in a lot of our religions, and a lot of the societal makeups that we come from, that we view women as subordinates, and not intentionally, right? But we view women as subordinates because of what we have been taught and what we have learned about what the role of a man is and what the role of a woman is. And these can be completely distorted. And it's in that distortion that you can end up having challenges and problems such as gender-based violence. The fact that I can think to myself that you have to be my servant as Tina, that you have to clean up after me as Tina, that you and I can both go through an 8-hour day at work, yet when we come back home, I still expect you to perform wifely duties and clean and cook and take care of the kids. And, you know, it's very easy in these conversations that we're having, like in the podcast, just to immediately be like, oh, absolutely not. I would not put up with that as Tina. But you would actually be surprised in the work that we've done all over the years in different parts of the country. Those are stereotypes that still exist, and breaking down stereotypes that are informed by culture, that are informed by misinterpretations of scripture and religion. Breaking down those stereotypes is something that is absolutely difficult. Because essentially, the minute you say that as a man, you have to provide, you have to love, you have to serve, you have to be an equal partner, even though the two of you are different, you have to treat each other as equals. You are breaking down generational stereotypes that have been carried into that family, into that culture, into that community, into that society. And you're coming with a completely new narrative that sometimes is not even accepted or welcomed. You know, you're not, in the work that we do, we're not always the favorite guys by the end of the workshops, because we're saying that positive masculinity is understanding that as a man, your strength as a man does not tie into what you have, but it ties into what you do with what you have. So this amazing physical strength that you have as a man, how do you use it, right? This amazing financial strength that you might have as a man who is employed, how do you use it? As a man who is not employed and who might be struggling financially, you can still see yourself as a man, and you can still see yourself as an active contributor to driving communities and society forward. But because, a lot of men have thought to themselves that my manhood is based on my income, they have stopped seeing themselves as active contributors, or they have stopped seeing themselves as good men, or they've stopped seeing themselves as valuable men. And that is those are essentially some of the questions and challenges that Father Nation has been trying to grapple with and to wrestle with over the past, I've been with the NPC for the past 7 years, but the NPC has been in existence, I think, for about 12 years. And I can tell you that even though it has been in place for the past 12 years, the struggles that men face from 12 years ago are still more or less the same as the struggles that they're facing today, because of the misconceptions and misteachings and misinformations and miseducations that we consistently receive, either from our own backgrounds, either from men that have mentored us, groomed us, and raised us, either from societies that we come from, either from slogans that carry themselves organically over mediums such as the media, social media. You go online and someone just randomly says that a man that doesn't have this or that is not a real man. And how many men actually believe that? And how many men internalize that and think to themselves that this is actually true? So I took an interest in that work because I thought to myself that I'm not going to be the type of man that defines himself based on what I have. I would much rather define my manhood based on the type of person that I am. And if the type of person that I am does not sit well with the general misconceptions that society has, again, at least I can sleep better at night, knowing that even if I do not have all of the money in the world in my bank balance, that my family is provided for because of the little that I'm able to contribute to them, right? That those who need to be present in their lives experience that presence, appreciate that presence, and they clap hands for that presence, and I don't have to seek societal validation or any form of validation externally, especially if that validation does not contribute to my overall well-being and my overall development as a man. And if every single man could live like that and think like that, challenges, a whole lot of challenges. We would be able, even if we don't completely eradicate them, but you would see a very big difference in how men conduct themselves, how they think of themselves, how confident they are in their manhood. And it's going to take, a very long time to get there.
I totally agree with you. I'm sure it will take a long time because there's this notion as well. Of course, you spoke about social media, and of course, we hear these slogans like "Yo, Indoda must," because a man must, and there's this, there's categories of what a man must have, must do, must be, must. So, I want to talk about inferiority because there's also, and in that, Sydney, you can also then take us through this. In that is, if a woman earns more than a man, these are issues that are not really spoken about.
Sure.
How does that take away from a man? Because we find a lot of men feel inferior by the mere fact that, oh, I can't date her because she's got more money than me. It's already like a standard that's been set that men that don't have more money than a woman, cannot be with that woman. Or women also, if I'm earning more than him, how is he supposed to be my man? And how do we break down those stereotypes? Because there is also the inferiority that comes with it, with that from a man's point of view, feeling inadequate and feeling less than a man should be. And I think you touched a little bit on it when you were responding. Now, how do we get to that place? What does it mean, or what is going on in that man's head? And again, we're talking about redefining strength and building a nation of balanced and compassionate leaders. And as individuals, both male, female, we are leaders. How do we come to a balance of understanding that it's really not about what you have, what you don't have, Or is it about what you have and don't have? I don't know. We want to hear from you who is doing this actual work and just take us through what that looks like, what it means, and the impact it has caused in society.
You know, Jeanette, that's a very good, very important, yet very difficult question to answer, because it ties into so many different things. It ties into the nature of the relationship and the expectations that were created as the founding basis of that particular relationship, marriage, union, whatever it is. It ties into teachings that both parties would be having from the backgrounds that they come from. As a man, have you been taught that you're inferior because you don't have financial muscle? As a woman, have you been taught that genuine affection and genuine love and genuineness from a man can only really be appreciated if it ties into how much he's willing to spend to show how present or how available he is? So it's a very difficult question to answer, and I'm going to try to take a jab at it and say, there is absolutely not a single person that there shouldn't be, and I know that this might sound like generalizing, but there should absolutely not be a single person that should not long for the ability to do for themselves as much as they want to. That's A. B. And this is not statistical research. No, this is me and the thousands and thousands of men that I've interacted with through the work that I do. And when you go to areas where we're doing training with men who are unemployed and men who absolutely do not have work and men who depend maybe on gardening services to earn like 50 rands on a particular day or 100 rands on a particular day, there's nothing that those men long for more than the ability to have as much as they can possibly have in order for them to provide to their heart's absolute abilities. And I think that I personally come from a background where I've seen a whole lot of men in my own family and other families who at some point, when the country got to the 70s, the 80s, and the early 90s, and you had all of these factories closing down because of a shortage of raw minerals and raw materials, right? When all of these companies started closing down, the dynamics and the complexities in their marriages and in their relationships had to change. Because then they had to ask themselves the question that now I'm retrenched and now that I'm not working, how do I still put forth a value proposition as a man, right? How do I still maintain my importance, not my superiority or inferiority? How do I still put forth my importance in this union as a man, right? And I always just make this very simple example that, and this is, if it sounds stereotypical, you forgive me, but I always make this example that at night, if a man and his wife are laying down, and they've gone to sleep for the night, and dogs start barking outside, and there's rattling sounds and rattling noises, and the wife is earning more than the man, and the man is completely broke. He doesn't have a job. Maybe he's a stay-at-home dad or whatever the case may be. And I always ask the question in the workshops that dogs are barking. You can clearly hear that there's someone outside. At that point in time, does it matter who's earning more than the other? The vast majority of people who are attending will say absolutely not, right? Because innately, and this also ties into the different faiths that people have. And I know that we're living in a world where there are conversations around gender fluidity and I completely sensitize with those. But a whole lot of us come from backgrounds where we knew and understood that when we talk about the provision that a man gives to a family or the provision that a man gives, it does not only tie into financial provision. Is he present in the lives of the people that he has to be present for, right? If the yard is falling apart and there's a thief that wants to break into my house and gain access to my wife and gain access to my children, before he gains access to them, he first has to go through me. And that is the guarantee that I should be able to put forth to my spouse, to my fiance, to my partner, that even in the event where I can't get you the latest this, or I can't buy you the latest that, you can rest assured that whatever provision has to do with your safety and my presence as being an active and present father figure, and me waking up and trying my level best to try and provide for you, even if I do fail, it's the principles that I have as a man and the value systems that I have as a man that should outweigh my financial position. How many times have we seen, unions, relationships, partnerships where there was financial convenience and, there was this man who can afford to buy everything, but there was no love and no joy and no happiness in that household. You open the fridge is full, the kids have the latest sneakers, they have the latest phones, you've got a 60, 70-inch plasma screen in the living room, but there is no guarantee of any provision outside of the financial provisions.
Sure.
So it's a difficult question to answer, because not only do men define their manhood based on the amount of money that they have, but like I mentioned, you go online and, we live in a society where a lot of women too define the level of manhood that a manhood has based on the amount of money that he has. And sometimes, there is research that suggested that some women stay in abusive partnerships and in abusive relationships because of the financial convenience that comes from that relationship. That I want to leave, but I'm being fed here. I'm being taken care of financially here. That my kids are being taken to fine schools here, and if I leave, then I lose all of that. And I think it just generally ties down to, what do you believe in as an individual? What do you believe in as a person? What value systems and principles do you subscribe to, right? What do you hold more important to you? Is the amount of money that you have or that you could have more important than the genuine partnership that you could form on the basis of mutual respect, mutual trust, and a mutual agreement also? I'm not trying to glorify the fact that if I'm a man and my partner is earning more than me, then I should be like, I'm going to leave everything, I don't care. But what I am saying is, in any aspect where a man should be trying to provide, he should try his level best. But in his trying his level best, he should also be receiving that appreciation and recognition, right? That, what, sure, I do earn more than you, but flip, when the ceiling is falling down, you're the guy that's up on the ladder fixing it, right? When the paint is worn out, you're the guy that's painting it. When I have a flat tire in the middle of the night on the N14, you're the guy that drives out in the middle of the night and comes sorted out. And I think those qualities, for me, and this is not in general, for me, those qualities of acting when you need to act, being present where you need to be present, and trying your level best as a man to live a life of principles, values, outweighs whatever amount of money you could possibly have. You can't buy character. And as a man without character, you are essentially, it's like, and you're not, it's difficult to explain and define manhood where there isn't character, because what grounds you and
That's
what
right.
defines you and what drives you, right? Yeah. So, hey, I'm sorry for that very lengthy answer, which wasn't an answer. I know that I went Jacob Zuma and I went Miando's, but I really hope.
And you see, the thing is, we're just getting into the meat of it, and our time is almost going out. So I'm going to ask that we pace your responses, please, for us, because we still have so many questions for you. Right. That was insightful, and I love the fact that you really pinpoint on financial provision as not only the provision that should be, looked for, because that's the thing, that's the narrative, right? That provision. The moment you hear provision, even from a spiritual point of view, we read the men must provide. But
Sure.
Is the word really saying only financially or provisioning all aspects, like you said, being present for the people that they need to be present for, being that person with the character, providing a character that is really needed in the home. And I think those are some of the aspects of provision that you were tapping into, which is really, really insightful. And I love that. You once spoke at the conference that we obviously met. You spoke about how men see women as objects. And I just want you to just deep dive into that, because I think it ties very closely to this financial aspect that we are talking about now. If you can just shed light into that.
The objectifying comes from misconceptions about masculinity and misconceptions about femininity, where one sees the other as inferior or as having to be of service to the other. And I often think to myself that if I as a man am going to define my manhood based on the amount of resources I have, then the general misconception I'm going to have in my head is that no one can tell me anything, right? And as history and the teachings that come from history would teach us, any man that does not listen to the counsel of wiser men or wiser women tends to objectify not only women, but tends to objectify anyone else who does not have the same accumulations as he does. So the fact that I use my material possessions as a defining metric to my importance as an individual, when I come across someone who doesn't have what I have, who doesn't have in his bank balance what I have in my bank balance, who doesn't drive the same car that I drive, if I'm stopped at a traffic light and I see someone who's just standing there and begging, right? And I already start having these ideas that this person is lazy, or this person is this, or this person is that. The objectifying comes from that notion that because I have more than he or she does, then I have a right to treat them in whatever manner I can treat them. In domestic partnerships in particular, whenever there's the conversation around gender-based violence, people talk about emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and these are very important to talk about for people to be aware about them. But very often than not, there's never the conversation around financial abuse and how financial abuse ties in strongly with religious misconception and cultural misconceptions. The fact that I believe as a man that I am the head and I should be the one to provide, and as a result of me providing, then I can't have any dissent. I can't have anyone telling me that, no, this cannot be done this way or that cannot be done that way, right? I sort of have this entitlement to superiority because I have access to more things than the other person has access to. And because I think that you're not human enough to argue with me because you don't have what I have, then I'm going to treat you as an object. I'm going to treat you as, but what can you tell me? Because how much do you have? And I think a lot of us have come across individuals who are like that. A lot of us have come across individuals who will really make you feel like the scum of the earth simply because you cannot reach their level of supposed success. And it's just unfortunate that as a result of the objectifying of women, it not only makes women feel inferior in those sort of partnerships, but it also gives a misconception to other men that is how you should be treating women. That is how you should be treating life partners, right? And the unfortunate thing is when it's done in front of boy children growing up, because they get exposed to it and they think to themselves, oh, so this is how it's supposed to be done. And then the cycle just went over again.
That's right. Thank you for shedding light into that, Sydney. Now, in your opinion, and going back to the faith aspect, of course, because we really want people to get the full understanding. In your opinion, what role does faith play in positive masculinity? Is it faith in the choices the men make in partnership with the woman, or is it also trusting the woman to lead in a certain way without being threatened, maybe as an example?
You know, I think all of us, when we got to, well, some of us they learned it in Sunday school. Some of us we learned it in primary school. All of us told the story about Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden, and how it was created, and how the man was created, and how God bore Eve out of the rib of a man, right? And I remember listening to this sermon online. I just can't remember who was giving the sermon. And, you know, this preacher was essentially saying that, you know, he was discussing this book of Genesis, and then he got to the point where he was reprimanding and rebuking men within the church to know and understand why they were created, and why they were entrusted with more upper body strength as opposed to women, right? And he says that the reason why, he makes this analogy about boxers, and he says that when you're boxing, any good boxing coach will tell you that when you block your ribs, because if you don't block your ribs, then you're giving the other opponent to thrash your ribs, and if your ribs are thrashed, then it becomes difficult for you to breathe. And so he gave this long sermon, but the point he was driving to is, as a man, the importance of you taking care of the rib is so that the rib can continue to take care of you as well. Sure. And it ties into a partnership, right? It ties into the understanding that even though we could be biologically different, it does not at all mean that one is more important than the other. You know, I come from a household where my mother is the nurturer. You know, she's the nurturer. She's the carer. She's the how can I put it, man? Like someone who disciplines you, but disciplines you with ease and with gentleness. And my father was a no nonsense, this is how it should be done, disciplinarian, right? And the partnership that I'm referring to, if you take a world of these two people and you blend them into one, it gives you sort of an emotional balance. It teaches you as an individual when to be assertive, when to stand up for yourself, when to be gentle, when to be empathetic, when to be considerate of other people's emotions, when to be considerate of your emotions, and just being able to have that partnership, that understanding of these two differences. So I think that, you know, if more people understood masculinity and femininity not as opposites, but as complements, you know, as one being the missing puzzle piece to the other, then, you know, then we would really get far in terms of how we view our roles and our positions generally as people. It would change completely how we view ourselves, and why we are where we are, and why we meet the people that we meet, and why we act the way we act, and why we assimilate the way we assimilate. And that only begins when we are willing to learn, unlearn, and constantly relearn. And if we can't do these three things, then we will always think to ourselves that, women don't know what they want. Men don't know what they want. Women are evil. Men are dogs. This one is trash. This one is nonsense. And there will never be common ground where we actually think to ourselves that, you know what? I actually need that sense of care, that sense of caress to complement my rowdy and crazy level of masculinity, right? I actually need someone who can tone me down, because if there isn't anyone to tone me down, then I use my masculinity in a way that ends up being called toxic. That's right. So the complement between these two is absolutely crucial.
I couldn't agree less with you. And I think same goes for organizations as well. You know, that there's, if organizations wanted to thrive and go further, they should get to a point where they understand that men and women need to complement one another. There's a moment in time where the man must lead. There's a moment in time where a woman must lead, or where must hold a certain conversation, and just balance each other, because we do need each other to ensure that, even in society, to ensure that.
I'm sorry, Tina, there can never be a point in time where one thinks to themselves that they absolutely have every single answer to every single thing, right? My director always says that meet a man who has lived by himself for the longest of times. It doesn't matter how white his tile is, how clean his home is. And as soon as he finds a female companion, just look at how drastically his life changes. And I often think to myself that it is because of it's because of that innate ability to lead in areas where we are most comfortable in, where we know that in these areas we are definitely in charge, right? When it comes to turning a house into a home, I am definitely in charge. When it comes to being a disciplinarian, I'm definitely in charge. When it comes to saying that you are not going out at this time, you know that you can take charge there. But when it comes to a gentle caress, then you can know that you are definitely in charge. And being able to understand the complementary nature of these two as building blocks to one another, and not as one being subservient or one being superior to the other, it would really take us a very, very long way.
Totally agree. Now, Sydney, we left with less than 5 minutes to end this, but I can't believe it's an hour already. I want to ask this question, and I think it's a very fundamental one. What are some of the things that men are struggling with at the moment, and how can we as women support men to lead in a positive way?
I think goodness, and just having a good built-up character. I don't know what is happening in society, and remember, I mentioned earlier on that I qualified as an educator. It is alarming the number of kids who are failing a subject that you would think is as simple as life orientation. It's alarming. And that goes to show that generally in society there's moral decay, there's a moral fiber that is dying out. And I think it's dying out because as people we have normalized sensationalism over empathy, over care, over being there for one another. In the olden days, if it's school holidays now, you would have kids running in the street and this one going to play at that one's house, and that would just be normal. And as years have passed by, we've become just so isolated from one another. And in terms of men, if men understood that there's absolutely nothing wrong with being a good, upright, honest, dedicated man, that it's not a sign of weakness, it is actually a sign of strength, that it's not a sign of weakness to be vulnerable, to talk about your emotions, to talk about the things that you are going through. And I think that, in how women could help us is by understanding that, sometimes we do need that vulnerability. We do want that moment to have a moment of intimacy and vulnerability without the expectation of sexual intercourse, right? Just to be openly open and openly vulnerable, without physical intimacy, just to be intimate enough and vulnerable enough to say that, you know what, I really feel like a failure, and I really feel like I'm not doing enough with my life, and I really don't know what to do. And sometimes, Tina, the best way to support someone who's going through a mental breakdown or an emotional breakdown is not to act like you have all the answers to the challenges that they have. But sometimes the best thing you can do for them is just to listen. Just to listen and say, you know what, Sydney, Uzolunga, it will be fine. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep being who you are. Keep trying to do what you do. Right? Continue being there. We appreciate you. We love you. We see you. We recognize you. I feel like that is way more validation compared to the different ways and the different forms that we as men try to validate our manhood, that sometimes seems or becomes toxic.
That's right. Sure. That's deep and powerful. Sydney, thank you so much for shedding light and really sharing that. I absolutely just love how you packaged it. And I guess it comes back to creating safe spaces for all of us. Women need a safe space in a man. Men need a safe space in a woman. And it doesn't have to be because there is a love relationship always. I think just even in society as community, just we should be able to create safe spaces for one another in order for all of us to thrive. Now, in closing, Sydney, and I know there's so much we needed to ask, we needed to get into, and unfortunately our time. But in closing, I want you to just give one piece of advice, maybe to the women, to the men, in just rounding up what positive masculinity is, and a word of advice, I guess, to men, but also even to the next generation, upcoming men and women as well. Just your word of advice as a person who is into this work, who's leading in the forefront in terms of the work that you do. We were talking earlier on about the 16 days of activism and gender-based violence, which is part of what you do as well, and just tying into that and summarizing as we close off.
The piece of advice that I would give to men is something that Dr. Jordan Peterson said, that do not leave your conscience to be violated, because when you violate your conscience, when you do something that you innately know is wrong and should not be done, whether you like it or not, you can base it on faith, on religion, whether we like it or not. The bad that we do to people, in some way or the other, there's a causal effect that will put us in positions where we have to account for the things that we've done. And so the general misconceptions that we have about masculinity, the things that we say to women or about women, the moments where we're supposed to speak up when there's something wrong that is being done and we keep quiet, constantly violating our conscience in one way or the other, there is going to be a point in time where we have to account for it. That is and the advice that I would give to women is it's not a battlefield. It's not a contest between who's more important than the other, who's more superior, who's more inferior, who runs the world, who doesn't run the world. In the same way that there is an importance for developing women and seeing to it that women are at the cornerstone of the development of society, of the building of society. We must not do that at the expense of the development of men or at the development of boys, right? If we are building strong, assertive, confident women, a friend of mine always asks the question that if we build strong, confident, assertive girls, and we're not building strong, confident, assertive boys, then who are we building the strong, assertive girls for? And what type of societal imbalances are we going to have in the future? It's very difficult balancing a scale, but I think if we all collectively put our efforts into trying to balance it, Nelson Mandela said it always seems impossible until it's done.
Amazing. Oh, now there you have it, Faith in Action podcast listeners and watchers. Sydney Madibo on the Faith in Action platform, really sharing his wisdom, his journey, up for the work that he is involved in, which is on positive masculinity. He leads an NPO that is called Father a Nation, and I think it's very, very profound, a beautiful name, by the way. And I think, just listening to you today has really opened up a lot, Sydney. Again, thank you for your wisdom and coming through to the Faith in Action podcast to share with us. And I think, for those that were listening and those that are watching, there is one or two things that you have learned today, one or two things that you've gleaned on. And I think something that you also need to lead with in terms of how men and women complement each other, and we're not in a competition. We're not here to fight one another. And let's always keep that in mind. Yet another exciting episode, yet another informative episode, yet another inspiring episode, transformative episode of the Faith in Action podcast. Until we meet again next time, it's goodbye from me, your host, Tinashe Mujera. And Sydney, thank you so much. It's goodbye for now. Please stay on the line. Faith has been my anchor. And in the darkest moments, I realized how much God's love could heal the brokenness in me. It was through faith that I found my strength. When you surrender to God's plan, that's when you truly start to live. Faith isn't just about believing. It's about acting on what you believe. I am Tinashe Mujera, a transformational leadership coach, an author and marketplace professional using faith as my anchor. Join us on the Faith in Action podcast, where each week we journey together through resilience, hope, and transformation. Tune in and let our guests help guide you toward your next steps in healing and growth.